This is the Whimsy Farm Podcast. I'm Carolyn Crane.
There's a big wide world right out your door. Good people doing good things. Whoa, it's a big wide world. Oh, now is the time. Now is our time.
Welcome, everyone. Today I speak with Chuck Collins, author of Burned by Billionaires: How Concentrated Wealth and Power Are Ruining Our Lives and Our Planet. Collins is a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, where he co-edits inequality.org. He is the author of several books, including Born on Third Base, The Wealth Hoarders, and with Bill Gates Sr., Wealth and Our Commonwealth. Chuck Collins, welcome to the Whimsy Farm Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, we're talking today about your book, Burned by Billionaires, and you begin by talking about the different degrees of wealth in our society, starting with affluence and moving on up. You have entertaining names for them. Can you talk about the terms you use and explain how these strata differ?
Sure. Well, part of it is people say, well, who are the wealthy? What do you mean by wealthy? And where does the power lie? And so I kind of borrowed from a journalist, Robert Frank, who wrote a book called Richistan. And he kind of segmented the wealthy down, and I kind of took his idea and elaborated on it and updated it. So I talk about affluentville is really the top 10% of households, and then lower, middle, and upper Richistan, which is really the 1%. And then there's Billionaireville at the very top. And there are about 905 billionaires in the United States with like $8 trillion combined, which is a lot of money. Um, but the question is sort of where is power and wealth? And my view, and I try to communicate this in the book, is if you have 30 or $40 million or more, you're in the top 1/10 of 1%. And that's where wealth converts to power. If you have 20 million or $10 million, you're set for life. You're living in more or less a bubble of luxury, and your children are going to be fine, and you have multiple homes, and maybe you're flying in a private jet. But when you cross over into the $40 million level, you're not just buying jets and mansions, you're buying senators and media outlets, and you're wielding enormous power and influence in the economy and in the culture. So our focus in this book is really on that top 1/10 of 1%, who, by the way, have seen the lion's share of income and wealth gains in the last 2 decades. And so I think it's helpful just to sort of have a kind of geography of wealth and talk about, okay, there's consumption, different kinds of consumption, but what we really care about in this conversation is about the power.
And you talk about this as the second Gilded Age. Could you give us a little history, put that in context for us?
Yeah, the first Gilded Age was really after the rise of industrialization, 1880 to 1920 or so, the turn of the century, 1900. There's a phrase coined by Mark Twain. Now it's an HBO series, which apparently I haven't seen it, but is pretty historically accurate.
I've seen it. It's one of my favorite shows.
Yeah, people love it. And that was the last time that we had these extreme inequalities of wealth. We saw the great robber baron fortunes and the what they called the huge trusts, which were the big corporate combinations of the era, the meat trust and the logging timber trust and the coal and steel trust. These are where great fortunes were created and expropriated, if you will. So that is, the last time. And then there was a response to that. Farmers and urban workers and ordinary people kind of pushed back and said, we want a society that isn't just organized to serve the rich. And we saw a Great Depression and a war, but also a lot of reforms like the New Deal reforms of the Depression that kind of meant that the 30 years after World War II was a period of relative shared prosperity. It wasn't rigid equality, but the rising tide lifted all boats, not just the mansion, not just the yachts. And and so now we're, since the late 70s, 80s, we've seen this growing pulling apart, this updraft of wealth to the 1% and the top 1/10 of 1%. So there's a lot of similarities in that there are periods of great extreme inequality. There's a couple important differences. I think our technology today means that the the inequalities are almost supercharged, accelerated. The climate crisis and the environmental crisis kind of creates a new kind of context. We don't have, 50 years to figure this out. But there's a lot of parallels to the period of inequality from a century ago.
One of the things you talk about is the principle of meritocracy. And I think as Americans, we're hardwired to accept and even strive for a meritocratic society. And isn't that good? I mean, shouldn't hard work and savvy decision making be rewarded? And what do you say to the people who say that, those billionaires have a right to this? They earned this money.
Yeah, I kind of have a sort of nuanced answer to that, which is, actually think that there are people in our society that exercise great creativity and effort and maybe invent a better mousetrap or something that's useful to society. And, they should be rewarded for that. So that story of, America meritocracy, that anyone can become rich, that's less the case. We can look at all the deep structural inequalities, but the idea that people be rewarded for innovating or inventing something useful or starting a useful business is something we celebrate. I think and I try to really parse this in the book to say, look, there is a stage of wealth formation, accumulation, which, has some rewards in it what people do matters. What your students and listeners do actually matters. How they, J. Paul Getty was once asked, how do you become wealthy in America? And he said, it's actually simple. There's just three things you have to do. One, get up early in the morning. Two, work hard all day. And three, find oil. And those were his, but I think when we see somebody with great wealth, there's a segment of folks who say, well, they deserve that. They deserve what they have because they invented something or they created a business, and it's not easy to do that. Uh, what I try to explain is once people kind of move past that stage, once they start to accumulate wealth and power at that 30, $40 million level, then they start to invest. They start to hire help, if you will, to uh, create tax shelters, to move money to the shadows, to play shell games with their wealth so they don't have to pay taxes, or they use their power to block competition and create monopolies so their businesses can grow without competition. So they manipulate the market and they engage in political capture, which is using that power to influence lawmaking and regulation and that sort of thing. So, after a certain stage, the wealth starts to be power, and it's the power to corrupt and self-deal. And then this final stage I write about is, I call it hyper extraction, where people have figured out how to take advantage of the inequalities in society that the wealthy are kind of essentially preying on the rest of the economy. The healthcare system is a great example, or the housing market right now, where so many people lack affordable housing. You'll see the billionaire private equity funds right in there trying to squeeze more wealth out of already squeezed people in different segments of our economy. So yeah, the story of meritocratic rise there's an element of truth to it, but we have to look at the sort of bigger story, and also look at the ways in which society helps create the fertile ground for wealth creation. No one does it alone. And I think individual effort matters, but so does the context and the fertile ground that we as a society create together for businesses.
I appreciate you bringing up housing and healthcare, and we'll get to those in a few minutes in more depth. But I wanted to start with the environment and a quote that Utah Phillips is famous for saying, he said, "The earth isn't dying, it's being killed, and the people killing it have names and addresses." And you name them in this book. You don't pull punches. Can you name some names and talk about who is responsible for the worst of the environmental devastation that's happening right now?
Yeah, there's three reasons why I think we should really look at the role of the wealthy and billionaires in the trashing of the environment and accelerating climate change. One is that they are the super emitters. Uh, the ultra wealthy have more houses, they have higher levels of consumption, they use private jets. Some of them have yachts, which are among the most polluting form of luxury consumption you can have. Um, and they're consuming that their carbon footprint is thousands of times the percent or the tons of ordinary folks. And then they're kind of at a time when we sort of need to pull together and everybody needs to look at their own carbon impact and we need to make some shared sacrifices. Their activities undermine our solidarity, undermine the well-being and sort of that sense that we're all in this together. Because, Carolyn, you might say, well, I'm going to ride my bicycle today and I'm going to, make a choice about my consumption that's going to reduce, that's going to be good for the earth, where, Kylie Jenner is going to fly their private jet across LA to have lunch with a friend. So that plays us for chumps. Um, but the other thing is there's a segment of the billionaire class, I call them the sort of the fossil fuel billionaires, the wealthy who have made their money from big oil and coal and gas. And they are very specifically using their wealth, power, and position in companies to run out the clock, to to block alternatives. And they made a huge investment in the current president. And they've, of course, invested in all the presidents, Democrats and Republicans, trying to get their way. But they made a big bet trying to get President Trump elected. And, they put millions of dollars into getting him elected because they know he was going to try to roll back some of the environmental regulations and policies to address climate change. And they are reaping huge payback. So yeah, there are people like Larry Ellison, who, is the second wealthiest person in the United States, who has a yacht that burns like 6,000 tons of carbon a year. Um, one of my one of the oligarchs I've been tracking is named Jim Gretsch. He's the CEO of Peabody Energy, used to be called Peabody Coal. And he has, in his role as head of lots of associations and a large coal company, lobbied to keep these zombie coal plants open, coal plants that everybody know are huge polluters and they're on schedule to be closed down. He lobbied to get a national emergency to keep these coal plants open as they shut down wind projects that are almost completed and other renewable energy projects and are sort of snuffing out the competition. So that particular group is personally, in my view, personally responsible for running out the climate clock. And if people are interested in that, they should see there's a website called climatecriminals.org, which documents and prepares dossiers on 40 or 50 uh, individuals who I think we can point to and say they personally are running out the clock for climate action, and they should be held to a greater account.
But I want to remind my listeners that in previous episodes, recently we spoke with Antonia Juhas, who was just in Alaska, who talked specifically about the rollback of renewables and new LNG pipeline. And just 2 weeks ago, we talked with Mark Dyken, who is an activist on the Navajo reservation, who talked about Peabody coal and the grandmothers who resisted that. So if you want to know more about those and you missed those episodes, they're all on my website. But I wanted to say one more thing about that. And I noticed that people in the working class who care deeply about the environment, they sacrifice so much and feel so badly that they can't do more. And you talk about that in your book about how the billionaires have no intention of sacrificing, but that part of the propaganda is that the working class needs to be recycling more, needs to be doing more. And I have a friend who recently told me she gave up um, audiobooks because it was the only corporation she subscribed to, and she felt like she had to make a sacrifice. So the only thing she did that she thought was bad, she gave up. And my heart just went out because she isn't the problem.
Yeah.
And how do we educate people like my friend to say, listen to your audiobook. Don't worry about it. Listen to Chuck Collins's new book on your audiobook. And create a different kind of change that goes after the people who are actually killing the planet.
Yeah, I think so much energy goes into kind of looking at our individual responses. And I think that's a good impulse. I mean, I do believe in individual and personal responsibility, especially those of us who grew up in the global north and have sort of benefited from a century of fossil fuel burning that's kind of created the standard of living that we enjoy. Um, but I think, that the whole phrase carbon footprint was created by the fossil fuel industry to kind of shift responsibility away from corporations and wealthy folks onto everyone else. And, again, this is complicated. We all have some responsibility, but the ultra wealthy are the ones who really need to fundamentally change their behavior. And they should change their behavior before working class folks are being required to give up something that's essential. Um, you hear people talk about, well, you shouldn't be eating meat, and it's true. Meat can have a higher carbon footprint, but if you put it in the context of who's really burning the planet, uh, the ultra wealthy need to be the ones who alter their behavior the biggest, make the biggest changes and the soonest. And unfortunately, we're not in a position because they have so much power that they can fend off regulation. But I've been working on a campaign to stop the expansion of a private jet airport, and we have also advocated for raising taxes on private jet fuel. Private jets, private luxury jets, don't even pay anything near the real cost of their use of the airspace, let alone their environmental costs. So let's boost taxes on that harmful behavior, tax the bad, and use that revenue to build green infrastructure or help us invest in the climate transition. We should be talking a lot more about the role of the ultra wealthy in disrupting and burning our planet, and hold them to account before others have to make fundamental sacrifices.
And let's run down some of the other things you focus on in your book. Let's start with housing. How are billionaires affecting the housing market for the working class and the middle class?
Well, a lot of housing markets are just seeing huge disparity. Not only are we seeing people unsheltered and homeless, but people are stuck in rental housing where they're paying 40, 50% of their income. And then the fact that there's a whole generation that hopes to own their own home are kind of in that middle class space, but it's completely out of reach. And what I want people to understand is the billionaires, the ultra wealthy, are really worsening the housing crisis. They are buying up lots of land and housing, people owning multiple housing. There are these billionaire-backed private equity funds that are buying up rental housing and converting it to short-term rentals. I'm not talking about sort of mom and pop Airbnbs where, somebody's just renting the in-law apartment in their house. I'm talking about wealthy investors buying up hundreds of units of rental housing, displacing families, and then using them to rent, short-term rental. Um, Buying up single-family homes because they know people are going to be stuck in rental housing. So, well, you might as well rent a single-family home. So people like Jeff Bezos are invested in these real estate investment trusts that are buying up single-family homes and renting to long-term rentals to middle-class households. Um, and even buying up mobile home parks. billionaire-backed private equity funds love a captive market. And we'll talk about this theme, but one of the investors says, owning a mobile home park is like owning a Waffle House where your customers are chained to the booths. They have nowhere to go. And so you can just keep raising their rents and squeezing them for more and more money. And that's the private equity hyper extractive model. And finally, there's all these billionaires from around the world bringing their wealth to the US because we've become such a desirable tax haven that, billionaires who've ripped off the people in their own countries are coming here and parking their money. And where do they put it? They put a lot of it in real estate. So you see these luxury housing, luxury towers in major cities. Uh, they're not homes for people to live in. They're like safe deposit boxes in the sky. So you take all those forces together and you're basically worsening an already bad housing crisis.
Healthcare. How do billionaires influencing healthcare?
Well, again, healthcare is a huge part of our economy. It's a sixth of the economy, and it's just ripe for profit extraction. Um, so you see, again, billionaire-backed private equity funds buying up hospitals, buying up medical specialties. If you have the unfortunate experience of having to go to the hospital for an emergency, now you get 5 or 6 different bills from the anesthesiologist group, which is owned by this investor group, and the doctor's group, and the ambulance, and everybody's squeezing more out of your healthcare dollar. And the quality of healthcare is suffering because of that. Um, I lived in Boston for many years down the street from a hospital that was owned by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. And a lot of hospitals and healthcare facilities were started by religious organizations and civic groups that were looking out for the public good. But a lot of them are being bought up by these investors who are just in the business of squeezing more money out of it. So that's one area. And the other is that overall, our health, which is only partly connected to the healthcare system, but our overall health and well-being, the more unequal a society, the more unhealthy everyone is, because there's this breakdown in solidarity that's needed to maintain good public health. And we saw this during the pandemic when here we are, some people are making these, on the frontline employees and making the ultimate sacrifices, and other people have withdrawn to various bubbles. And then the ultra rich are just making money off the whole unfortunate situation. So that sense of, again, unequal sacrifice undermines that sense of, hey, we're all in this together. We all need to step up and do our part, except the rich over there who are laughing at us because they have multiple island homes. And, David Geffen's on his yacht sending pictures back saying, boy, I hope everybody's staying safe. We're sure to enjoying the sunset here in the Grenadines. That doesn't help our overall sense of health and well-being.
And another important part of health and well-being is food and where we get our food. And I think that many people who are working class are looking at getting the most value for their dollar. All you have to do is watch any TV commercials to know that's what it's all about. But how does the billionaire class diminish the working class's ability to feed themselves well?
Yeah, what's happening is that in almost every section of the food economy, there's 2 or 3 massive I call them the food barons. They're basically dominating what's being grown, what's being produced. They're looking to make the most money off of particular products, so they're swapping out ingredients that are less healthy. They're controlling the whole supply chain. People have talked a lot about the price of groceries in the last couple of years. Well, who's responsible for goosing up the price of groceries? Um, there's one grain company, the Cargill Macmillan. Those of us in the Midwest know about Cargill. It dominates a fourth of the world's grain production. And there are hundreds of family members, who are all billionaires. There's 21 family members who are billionaires. This is a 4 generation owned dynastic company that dominates the grain market. Um, so they have this huge power over setting of prices, setting of standards. Um, there's the largest hog producers in the country in Iowa use their wealth and power to fend off regulations so they can grow animals in these large feedlots, these large, kind of manure lagoons, confined animal production off facilities. Again, they're using their power to make a less healthy product for both the animals and the humans. So you see this across the food sector, and it's really, in a way, dictates kind of what's on your dinner plate, what's the most affordable thing you can buy, and it unfortunately tends not to be the most healthy thing. So that's concerning. And we still do have a part of our food economy that's locally owned, and where maybe there's farmers markets, and we're paying the farmers, but the food has a premium. It's harder for working class folks to pay the extra premium to have the most healthy food, but it shouldn't be that way. And we should find a ways to, reduce the cost, not squeeze the farmer, but just reduce the costs and the middlemen around food production. So food is one of those areas where it really touches our lives, how these concentrations of wealth play out.
You talk about one other pocket that I haven't really thought of as much, and that is the way that our love, our and our growing, changing relationship with our pets is benefiting the billionaire class. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of us, the animals in our lives are really important members of our family. And there are a lot of people who are choosing not to have children or grow old and they live alone, but they have an animal that is their companion. And the private equity billionaires know that this. They know that sometimes we're willing to even go into debt for the care of these animals. We want them to have good lives as well. We want them to have good food and healthy walks and things like that. So one of the areas where the billionaire-backed private equities firms have really moved in is in this pet space, buying up veterinary hospitals, buying up emergency services for animals. Now, and more, those are owned by big investor groups. They're buying up food companies. Mars Candy, we think of the Mars bars and the candy, but Mars is one of the hugest investors in animal food and pet services. Even dog walking. There are these apps, Wags and Rover.com. These are, you match an animal care person to help care for an animal. Well, Blackstone has bought up Rover.com because they see that there's a money to be made. So, even our love of animals is sort of being exploited by the vulture, the vulture capitalists, if you will. So that's, and that's something, again, we don't think about this. In fact, a lot of these veterinary clinics maintain a sort of mom and pop ownership look. You don't know that they're owned by Veterinary Corporation of America or one of these large hospital conglomerates, but the reality is the fees are going up. You bring your animal in for an emergency service, and they say, "Great, let's swipe your credit card." And your fees are going to be $2,000. You're going to walk out of there uh, with a huge amount of debt, and the investor class knows that, and they are happy to squeeze every nickel out of your love of your animal.
And you really do a good job in the book of showing this canvas of how really wherever we turn, we're affected by this capitalism run amok or corporatism run amok or a combination of the two. And central to all of those tangents is how billionaires are affecting democracy itself and our ability then to react to them. Can you talk a little bit about how billionaires are affecting the democratic process?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is a form of capture, billionaire capture of our democratic system, and it's clearly our elections, the ability to affect who gets elected, who even gets to stand for election. Candidates have to go through an informal process I call the wealth primary, where, they stand before the donor class and decide who's viable. The voice and vote of ordinary people has been diminished. And I think that's the big consequence. We've all been robbed of our sense of agency and vote, um, to the point where almost no legislation passes unless there's a faction of billionaires who back it. Um, and this is why it's very hard to levy taxes on the wealthy, because they have used their wealth and power and capture to block things they don't like. And that's one of the consequences here, is blocking popular reforms. And here we are living with what may end up being the longest government shutdown. The billionaire class loves these government shutdowns. They love to sow the seeds of cynicism. Government can't solve your problem. You're all on your own trying to figure this out. You need to find private services. Forget about the public sector. You are on your own. It's kind of despairing. It is important to realize that, about 3 years ago, Congress almost passed a massive piece of legislation called Build Back Better that would have expanded health care, would have lifted children out of poverty, would have addressed the climate infrastructure problem, would have solved a lot of big problems that are very popular, and it would have been paid for. A $3.5 trillion investment bill would have been paid for entirely by taxes on multimillionaires and billionaires. And 75, 80% of the population thought this was a good legislation, but it was blocked. And in the end, it was two Democratic senators who got sort of bought off, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who have retired now and are set for life because of their uh, subordination and subservience to the billionaire class. Joe Manchin gets to tootle around on his yacht. We came, though, within a thread of something big and bold happening. And it just shows that we haven't lost power, and we can rebuild the political movements that could pass that kind of legislation that would greatly improve the quality of so many people's lives. Without that, we're just heading down this trail of greater stress, greater sort of individual quiet suffering, and growing polarization.
Yeah, your discussion of the Build Back Better thing is very hopeful because the way things are today, the end of 2025, it looks pretty bleak as far as any reform happening. And that's what the end of your book is about. When I was reading it, I thought, oh, this is like Project 2029. This is how we're going to fix everything that we're in now. And then part of me thought, yeah, but what are the odds of that happening? And then I read about when you talked about Build Back Better. I thought, if we were that close 3 years ago, we can get that close again and we can do it. I'd like you to talk about some of what you think are the key points in your Project 2029, the reforms you talk about. What do you see that we need to do to fix this mess?
Yeah, I do think that the pendulum is going to swing, in part because, and both under Democrats and Republicans, no one has addressed the deep crisis for working people. That's the reasons and the grievances that people feel left behind. Um, so, the current regime is, it's very hard to imagine, in this moment, that anything's going to change, and we may be heading into, darker times, but actually see a lot of cracks and cleavages in the coalition that elected the current president. For instance, I live in a rural area too, where there's a lot of farmers who voted for the current president, and they're kind of like, I'm not sure I bought the right package here. I might return it. Uh, and
Hmm.
whether it's between the tariffs or having their workers abducted, or just seeing what's happening to food prices, that's not, money not going to them. And I do think that we're going to see a big shift in the short term, because more and more people are going to start to run for office saying, I'm supporting an economy that works for everybody, not the billionaire class. And they're going to break through this kind of phony populism, like, okay, yeah, we'll throw you a crumb. We'll eliminate taxes on tips and tipped wages or something like that. That's like a morsel being tossed to working people. But I think it's important for each of us to talk to our neighbors and talk about the ways that each of our lives are being burned by billionaires, are being touched and worsened by these inequalities. And then I think we need to imagine, envision and participate in campaigns that reduce concentrations of wealth and make investments in things that improve everyone's lives. So, for example, I mentioned let's tax private jet fuel and invest in green transit, or let's tax luxury real estate transfers, you know, property sales over 2 million or over 5 million, and tax a portion of that and put it into a fund for permanently affordable housing. Or let's tax billionaire inheritances to slow the dynastic buildup of wealth, save democracy, but also invest in education and opportunity, job training for everybody. So, I think if we pair together the big, bold things that we know we can do together, and at the same time link it to revenue and link it to reducing the concentration of wealth and power, that's the kind of program that I think if more and more people stand up and we start to do it at the state and local level, where we do have some room to move still and some agency, um, you could, in Michigan, we could create a new top tax rate on incomes over $1 million and have that dedicated to transit or education or infrastructure, something that everybody knows we need. Those are what I call game-changing campaigns, and they are happening around the country, and they're good examples of what's possible. So, I think reweaving our social fabric is also key. I live in a community. I grew up in northern Michigan. My dad used to take me to this men's coffee clatch every day at 10 o'clock at the fire station. And all the neighbors got together, and the coffee was terrible. I mean, it was that, bitter Sanka in a styrofoam cup. But what was important is you kind of got to know everybody. You kind of got the gossip and you got the conversation. And so I was inspired by that. I helped start a coffee clatch in my little Vermont town. And now 40, 50 people come out every Friday morning. And, we have people who voted all different ways and different political views, but we're being neighborly and we're reminding ourselves that what we hold in common is way more important than what divides us. And I think that's part of our work too, is, getting away from the social media and the sort of poisonous images of each other and reminding each other who we are and what we share in common. Um, so I think that's part of the work as well.
What do you see as the ideal balance of meritocracy and government infrastructure?
Well, I don't think people become wealthy just entirely on their own, like we're born in a state of nature and we just kind of create something. We all live in a society, and we all live uh, in the United. If we live in the United States, we have several centuries of public investments and investments in knowledge and technology and infrastructure that kind of create the platform for successful business. So I think the attitude I would say is individuals matter and what you do matters. And if you get up early in the morning and if you work hard all day, that matters. And if you're creative and inventor or you bring a special talent to something, you should be rewarded for that. But we should never lose sight that no one does it alone and that we have to invest in the commonwealth, in the fertile ground that makes private wealth possible. And right now we're facing an ecological crisis that will destroy private wealth. I mean, look how quickly a wildfire or a flood or a drought or a hurricane or a tornado dismantles wealth. And we're seeing more and more of those kind of wealth destruction events. So we have to understand our wealth is connected to the health of the environment around us. So once we see that commons, that we are individuals in a commons, and that there's no wealth separate from that, then yeah, there's individual wealth and savings, and maybe, if you're fortunate, you own your own home, but we never lose sight of the fact that it's that context, it's that commonwealth that makes it all possible. And that's, in a sense, I think the justification for progressive taxation. The more wealth you have, the more you've disproportionately benefited from working and doing business in this economy. And if you have any doubt about that, go to a desert island and try to create wealth. You're not going to get very far. Um, I had the opportunity 20 years ago to work with Bill Gates's father, whose name is Bill Gates Sr. And he was kind of an old-fashioned civic guy, got the GI Bill, which made it possible for him to go to college after World War II, and he went to law school on the GI Bill. And he was always a very much of a community person. And when he was always asked about his son's wealth, he said, "Oh yeah, Bill is a smart guy. He deserves, some of that wealth. But to be honest, he's lucky. He's doing business in the United States, and all these public investments in knowledge and infrastructure is what made his wealth possible." And Bill Gates Sr. said it's the equivalent of putting a cherry on top of an ice cream sundae and claiming the whole ice cream parlor. That's the way we think about the economy today. It takes some skill to put that cherry on top of the ice cream sundae. You have to sort of make sure you don't miss the top. But that doesn't mean you get everything. You don't claim the whole commons and all the value that comes from that. And so that was his view about individual wealth compared to what it is we hold together in the investment and infrastructure that you're talking about.
That's a great image, a lasting image. Thank you for that. So your book is just out. What's next for your work? What are your plans to continue your mission?
Well, I'm really enjoying talking to you and talking to people about the book and talking about these ideas and kind of trying to connect the dots that these inequalities matter and kind of giving myself and everyone else a pep talk like, hey, this is we got to come together and if we don't do anything, we're going to keep going down this road. It's not going to be good for anybody. Um, I am working, on some of these campaigns around discouraging the expansion of private jets. I think private jets on a warming planet are indefensible. It's kind of luxuries that we can live without. Um, I'd rather see us investing in high-speed rail and things like that than more infrastructure for private jets. So I'm working on different pieces of this work. And the other research and book that I'm working on right now is about taxing wealth and investing in the climate transition. And there's really a global movement of people who are saying we have two huge problems, this huge imbalance of extreme wealth inequality and this climate crisis. And they're kind of like the harm next to the fix, the poison ivy that's going to irritate you next to the jewel weed that's going to heal the poison ivy. And so we think there should be much bigger, bolder taxes on wealth, on billionaire wealth in particular, wealth of the top 1/10 of 1%, and investments in green infrastructure and the energy transition. And we may not have time to offset the worst impacts of the next 10, 20 years, but we have to do something. And that's, so that intersection of inequality and climate disruption is where my interest in energy is for for the rest of my life, probably. So, that's what interests me and animates me right now.
Your answer reminded me of Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry for the Future. And the world he shows is a world that has done that.
Yeah.
It has breached that gap successfully.
I love that novel. And it was, you could sort of imagine over 40 years, humanity starts to turn the corner and gets its act together. Just a slight little plug. I also wrote a work of eco fiction called Alter to an Erupting Sun. It's a eco future fiction novel, but it's only set over the next 8 years because I sort of felt like 40 years, I wanted to sort of imagine humanity turning the corner sooner than that. And so if people are interested in speculative fiction, eco-fiction. Check out this novel, Altar to an Erupting Sun.
I will. I will. That is my jam, speculative fiction like that. And I'm slogging through Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy. I'm almost done with book two, but man, that's a commitment. So after I finish book two, then I think I'll take a break and read your book. So thanks for sharing about that,
Yeah.
and thanks for being my guest today. Is there anything else you want to say that didn't get said?
No, I hope people will. One other just kind of more fun thing is I encourage people to join the satirical resistance. You may have noticed on No King's Day or out in Portland, Oregon, that people are responding to sort of state repression with a sense of humor and dressing up as frogs. And well, there's this effort called Trillionaires for Trump. You may remember Billionaires for Bush from a couple decades ago. Well, Trillionaires for Trump is similar. There were at the No Kings marches, there were cadres of Trillionaires for Trump out marching, kind of carrying funny signs and taking the kind of message and taking it a little bit over the top. And for instance, they have a healthcare campaign called Go Fund Yourself. That's the solution to the healthcare crisis. So, yeah, check out the way, if you're discouraged and you want to, but you have a theatrical bent, that might be your way to plug in and be civically engaged.
I
And
agree. I think that's a hopeful trend. I saw it even in this little town of Milan. There were unicorns crossing the street during the No King's Day and lots of people in inflatable costumes. And it's a smart tactic and it's a joyful one. So I hope we see more of that, and I bet we will.
yeah, and it is a form of power. When you feel powerless to make parody of things that are happening that are unthinkable is a way to say, keep your spirits up and exercise your power. Um, and if people are interested in kind of these inequality issues, I co-ed a website called inequality.org, and we put out a newsletter every week that has a sense of humor and also lifts up, we call it the faces on the front line, people who are trying to work in their communities to address these extreme inequalities and keep people up to speed on some of the data and trends. So check out inequality.org if you want to learn more and be engaged in that space.
Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope we keep in touch about your future projects. Thanks so much, Chuck Collins.
Thanks for having me, Carolyn.
I've been speaking with Chuck Collins, author of Burned by Billionaires: How Concentrated Wealth and Power Are Ruining Our Lives and Our Planet. Collins is a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, where he co-edits inequality.org. He is the author of several books, including Born on Third Base, The Wealth Hoarders, and with Bill Gates Sr., Wealth and Our Commonwealth. This podcast is produced on the sacred ancestral land of the Anishinaabe people. Thanks to the California band Castle House for writing and performing our music. Thanks to our underwriter, Just Play Productions, and to our paid Patreon members for their support of today's podcast. If you'd like to offer your support, please visit my website, whimsyfarm.net, and click the Patreon link to find a level of support that's right for you. There is also a free membership level. You can email me through the website as well. That's whimsyfarm.net. The Whimsy Farm podcast airs the 1st and 15th of each month on our YouTube channel, Carolyn Crane and Whimsy Farm, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find links to audio, video, and Patreon, all at whimsyfarm.net. Be sure to join us December 15th for our season 1 finale. I will welcome author Susan Twitt to discuss her memoir, Blessed by Birds, and her flourishing Substack about terraphilia. Until then, remember the words of Utah Phillips, who said, "Too many good people are doing too many good things to afford me the luxury of being pessimistic." Get out there and create some positive change. Stay safe, everyone.
whimsyfarms.net